So, Isabel, Keir Starmer, I mean, he's doing okay in the polls. He's ahead of Rishi Sunak on pretty much every measure that counts and a few measures that don't count very much. But it is pretty clear, isn't it? It's undeniably clear that this has more to do with Rishi Sunak's woes and the sense in the country that it's a time for a change than to do with the offer and faith and love for Starmer and Labour.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of shadow cabinet ministers are very, very aware of, that actually, as you say, people still need to be given a reason to vote Labour rather than a reason to turn away from the Conservatives. And Keir Starmer has worked very hard on the internal arrangements in his party, kicking out the Corbynites, kicking out Jeremy Corbyn, cleaning the party up after anti-Semitism. He's worked very hard on to make the case that the Tories are incompetent, but making the case that Labour is exciting and has got lots of interesting ideas is very much still a job to be done. And he was at a conference organised by Tony Blair recently where he was saying that the atmosphere in the country, the mood of the voting public is not 1997, where things can only get better was the anthem. But actually, I think another difference with 1997 is also that he's not, he's not the exciting, interesting leader that Tony Blair had managed to cast himself as by this point.
Yeah, Tim, does that matter in your judgment as a Conservative? I mean, he's not Mr. Charisma. I mean, listening to Keir Starmer giving a speech, it is sometimes, let's be honest, it is like listening to an AI chat bot a lot of the time. But does that really matter?
I don't know. People often say that Keir Starmer's not Tony Blair, and he isn't. But neither is Rishi Sunak, John Major. Part of, I think we forget from that sort of 97 election was the Tories were unpopular, but John Major was actually very popular. People liked John. He was still seen as honest John. He was seen as the guy striving to do the right thing. Despite his party, the Conservative Party was unpopular, but John Major has somehow separated himself from that. There's a complex sort of set of factors running here. I think the big question for Keir Starmer, he can't do a personality transplant, even if he wanted. What he can do is, which is another thing that Blair didn't do, is he can give some people something bold to vote for. Yeah, something to excite people. But Blair's offer was his own personality. That was the thing, that supercharged British politics at that time. Keir could offer something, much more exciting than the five rather small pledges that Blair offered in 1997. Yeah. After Uxbridge, the potential consequences of doing something like that seem more dangerous, because that's what the Tories want. They're looking for something that they can, frighten voters with. And if that boldness is something that potentially will get Labour voters and traditional Labour voters out to vote, it might also, if it has tax implications, and most policies do have tax implications, it could be the sort of thing that will, the Tories will try and do another sort of Uxbridge style anti-ULEZ campaign on. So I don't envy him, over the next few months, because I think his situation probably can only get worse. And as the opinion polls narrow, do sort of the very real number of doubters inside Labour ranks start to ask more and more searching questions, and then you can sort of get a momentum of itself where a contraction in the polls is sort of reinforced by noises off.
But then you've got one of those Labour people who don't like Keir Starmer, don't like the idea that he's marginalised the left as much as he has, and he has. Where do they go apart from the the further fringe, who will go off to some other fringe party, maybe hoping Ken Livingstone does something dramatic? I mean, that's part of the calculation, the triangulation calculation. They got nowhere else to go. But Tim, I'm sure Keir Starmer's listening to us right now. I'm sure he always does. Well, this is potentially priceless contribution from you, Tim, as a lifelong Conservative. What can Starmer do to answer the call, to do what Tony Blair says he should do, which is to find a way to offer some hope? How on earth does he do that?
Goodness gracious. If I knew the answer to that, John, I wouldn't be giving it to Times Radio listeners, as precious and important as they are. I've been setting up a political consultancy and selling it for a lot of money. I think. But I just quarrel slightly with what you just said. They've got nowhere else to go. The Labour Party is very worried about the Green vote. Particularly among some of its marginals in the south. It's one of the reasons, because I sometimes wonder why they keep Ed Miliband, in the shadow cabinet, because he's not the most. I don't think he has particularly good relations with the leader's office.
Yes,
but Labour do say he is very potent amongst those sort of Green Labour waverers. So I don't know whether there is something that Keir Starmer can offer to answer your question. I think what he has to offer in a way is the solidity. That's what he is. And so how you bring the solidity alive or not, I don't know. But what I hear from, people who follow the Labour Party much more closely is he's doing an amazing job at candidate selection. If you look at, I think Isabel's colleague at The Spectator, Katie Balls, has nicknamed us the Stormtroopers. There seem to be people from solid backgrounds. They've done more than politics. They're on message. Potentially the Labour Parliamentary Party will be quite effective.
Yes.
After the next election.
Yeah.
Things that he's done. He's basically reorganised the Labour Party in a credible way, and somehow just saying, "I'm competent. I can deliver," and that's what the country is crying out for more than anything else. But can you make solidity and competence sexy? I don't know. But that's what I think he needs to do over the next, however long he's got until the election.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens to the Green. And you make a good, interesting point there. But when I say I don't know where else they're going to go, I suppose I mean that in sort of red wall marginals, we know where they're going to go because the polls tell us where they are, where they're heading. In a lot of those blue wall seats, those Labour voters are going to go exactly where Labour wants them to go, which is with the Liberal Democrats. Where the Lib Dems are second, and help to move the Tories in those seats. That was the sort of thought. I mean, Isabel. I mean, the Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves regime is nothing if not a safety first regime on spending, on tax, more recently on benefits. It is not exciting stuff. Is it wise, Isabel?
Yeah, and actually a lot of the excitement, Tim just mentioned Ed Miliband, I think a lot of the excitement has come from the former Labour leader, and not always in a good way. As Tim says, he is a very potent force. He's another person in politics who actually works incredibly hard and gets his way because he puts the legwork in on policy. And that, again, is something that has caused a lot of friction in the shadow cabinet.
Is he a plus for them? Is Ed Miliband a plus?
No, I don't think it is. And, I'm speaking to you from Scotland, where his Green policies have caused the Scottish Labour Party a huge amount of grief. His plan, which was eventually backed by Starmer, to ban all new licences for oil and gas extraction. If you talk to Scottish Labour MSPs up here, they'll say, well, that's basically closing down Aberdeen. And Labour's argument is, there's going to be lots of new green jobs. Well, most voters in Aberdeen don't think those green jobs are going to come to them if they ever turn up anywhere in Britain at all. So it's caused a lot of political damage. And, you don't even need to have a particularly long memory or have spent your entire life in politics to remember that actually under Ed Miliband, Scottish Labour was wiped out in a parliamentary sense.
Yes, and I do want to come to Scotland and the future of the union, or the position of the argument about the union, which is so relevant now, and will be at the next election too in just a second. But on the Labour question, I mean, do you both agree that Keir Starmer needs to find a way to invest more in his colleagues, to invest more faith in them to do the job and just shine a little more brightly, which some of them are perfectly capable of doing, Tim?
Yeah, he's very anxious, though, I think, about, in the last, just 2-3 days with the whole Farage business. It's been interesting to know. I think he came out with a line that Tony Blair would come out. He saw that this was an issue that, even if you didn't like Nigel Farage, you could see there was an essential liberty question here. And, he could recognise that all of the press, were basically on the side of the little guy against the big bank. There was a problem here. Whereas Rachel Reeves, who I rate generally, But she seemed to know. I don't know whether she's been speaking. She got quite close to Dame Alison Rose, but she sort of seemed to take the side of the chief executive. And when you are as nervous sort of about the Labour position as most Labour insiders are, and when you have a leader who is reasonably sure-footed, and David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary, is the sort of someone who will sometimes shoot from the hip. You are reluctant to delegate authority. Now, that may be a problem that Keir Starmer doesn't trust, the core members of his inner team, but he has reason to worry about them. And I think that's why he's not really equipping them and giving them the kind of role, John, that ideally he would be.
Yeah, I mean, Dame Alison Rose was exactly Rachel Reeves's kind of corporate player, wasn't she? I mean, she was she spoke out for, delivered a lot by way of the role of women at the top of the corporate ladder. The sort of the progressive philosophy of NatWest had a lot to do with her as well, and no doubt Rachel Reeves would have felt that quite keenly, as well as not liking to see Nigel Farage making the play.
Yeah, and also we mentioned my colleague Katie Balls a few minutes ago. I'm just going to plug another one of her pieces in this week's Spectator magazine, where she's been looking at Labour's improving relationship with business more generally, and the way in which Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have put a huge amount of effort into wooing these big figures, not just in banking, but across the business world. And so you can understand why the initial response of Rachel Reeves was to think about the people who she spent quite a lot of effort on whatever the 2023 equivalent of a prawn cocktail offensive with is.